On this Wednesday night, 2024 is going to look a lot like 2020. Donald Trump is set to square off with Joe Biden again as Nikki Haley drops out of the race.
I wish anyone well who would be America's president.
Where does this leave Republican voters who can't stand Trump? The Canadian family killed in a plane crash in Nashville.
It's a terrible, terrible tragedy.
What we know about a trip that went horribly wrong. Fresh aid airdropped into Gaza, the desperate need for food and the pressure growing on Canada to resume funding the UN's relief agency. And suspended, the consequences for the largest contractor behind the ArriveCan app.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It is a sequel coming to America in November, Biden versus Trump, even though many Americans are not enthusiastic about it. The road to the Republican nomination for former President Donald Trump is now clear because his only rival, Nikki Haley, has dropped out of the race.
The time has now come to suspend my campaign. I said I wanted Americans to have their voices heard. I have done that. I have no regrets.
Haley knew she couldn't beat Trump after suffering big losses on Super Tuesday, winning just one of 15 Republican primary contests. As he did in 2020, Trump has bulldozed through a field of Republican challengers. But he did lose the presidential election to Joe Biden in 2020, and this time Biden's campaign could look different. Jackson Proskow has our top story tonight.
By any measure, Donald Trump achieved the incredible, becoming the presumptive Republican nominee historically early in the campaign.
They tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive.
Conclusive enough to clear the field after Super Tuesday left Nikki Haley with no path forward. She walked away from the race without endorsing Trump.
It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him.
That includes many, if not most, Haley voters. At the ballot box, they were clear they won't support another Trump presidency, even if it means switching parties.
It hurts my soul to say that I will vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump.
I will be voting for Joe Biden in the general election, but I put in a vote for Nikki Haley.
Across the map, Trump's victories showed signs of serious weakness. In 6 states, he beat Haley by less than a 50-point margin. In conservative Utah, winning by just 15 points, while in Vermont, he lost by 4 points. A stunning underperformance for a man who is effectively running as an incumbent.
I would say this is a more serious difficulty for Trump. These are real voters who show up and have picked another candidate who has not endorsed Donald Trump, at least not yet.
Joe Biden faced no such problems. He sailed through every major primary by a much wider margin, even in the face of an organized, uncommitted protest vote.
I'm thrilled to be back.
By going all in on Trump, the Republican Party has backed a candidate who is pushing voters and allies away just when they need them the most. Trump had previously threatened Haley's donors and supporters, saying they would be permanently banned from his MAGA movement. But soon after Haley suspended her campaign, the Biden campaign began reaching out, saying Haley's supporters are welcome in their camp. Donna?
Interesting. And Jackson, it's going to be Trump against Biden again. But there are reports that Biden wants to take a much more aggressive approach to campaigning this time.
That's right. Biden believes he can rattle Trump and maybe trigger him during the campaign period. There are sort of 2 reasons for this more aggressive approach. One is that Biden is trying to assuage those concerns about his own age by showing he can still put up a good fight. And the other is that Biden and Trump are both deeply unpopular. Biden knows that neither man is going to turn that around by November. So he figures that the best hope is to find some way to make Trump seem even less palatable to voters than he already is.
It's a long time till November. Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. A jury in New Mexico has found the woman in charge of the safe handling of weapons on the set of the movie Rust guilty.
We find the defendant, Hannah Gutierrez, guilty of involuntary manslaughter as charged.
Anna Guterres-Reed was the armorer during filming of Rust in 2021. The actor Alec Baldwin held a prop gun that fired a live round, killing the film's cinematographer Helena Hutchins and injuring director Joel Sousa. The prosecutor said Guterres-Reed's actions constituted an astonishing failure to adhere to industry safety practices. Baldwin is set to face his own manslaughter trial in July. The 5 Canadians who died when a small plane crashed in Nashville were all from the same Ontario family. It went down next to a highway not far from the airport Monday evening, minutes after the pilot told air traffic control his engine had died. 3 young children and their parents were killed. And a warning, some of the details in this story are distressing. Eric Sorensen has more on the investigation.
The tragedy was devastating news at the offices of Rimma Dotsenko. The 39-year-old home decorator was killed along with her 3 young children and her husband, Victor, the pilot. A pall hung over the Brampton airport where pilots who knew Victor were in shock. It's affected all of us at the field here. We never want to lose anybody, especially for him to go down with his family and the children and all that stuff. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy. The family was on its way to vacation in Florida. The Piper PA-32R, a single-engine plane, left Milton, Ontario, according to FlightAware. There was nothing remarkable about its flight path until it was very near Nashville, Tennessee, when Victor, it's believed, made this call to air traffic control.
Nashville, up to clear in the emergency. My engine shut down.
30 seconds later, the final communication between tower and pilot.
Runway 2, clear to land. I'm too far away, I won't make it.
The plane crossed over an interstate highway, hit the ground, and burst into flames, 5 kilometers from the airport.
The airplane passed overhead, made a U-turn.
The National Transportation Safety Board said Tuesday it will look at all the possible causes, the weather, aircraft malfunction, and the pilot's actions and training.
And especially in a single-engine aircraft and at night, which was this situation, you don't have a whole lot of options when things start going wrong. To troubleshoot and effectively manage the aircraft malfunction to the point of getting it back to the airport.
The tragedy is compounded by the fact an entire family, including 3 children, were killed, 2 boys and a girl, all thought to be under the age of 12. An official helped them refuel in Pennsylvania.
They were incredibly excited to travel to the U.S. The pilot had indicated that they were flying to Florida. A very exciting time for the family. The kids seemed excited.
He was a great guy. Tony Starcevic says Victor, who immigrated to Canada some years ago, talked about how happy he was. He said Canada's the best country in the world, a country where you can own an airplane. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
If you were hoping for a cut in interest rates, you're going to have to wait. The Governor of the Bank of Canada says it's too early. He's holding the benchmark rate at 5%. After a series of historic hikes beginning 2 years ago, today is the 5th straight time the central bank has held its key overnight rate at 5%. The bank has signaled it wants to see sustained declines in inflation, which still sits at 2.9%. Mackenzie Gray was at today's announcement. Mac, any hints of what's coming down the road?
Not right now, Donna, but Governor Tiff Macklem did say 2 key things need to happen before they consider cuts. First, inflation needs to come down even more. It's at the 3% range right now. But Macklem is worried that stronger than expected growth in both Canada and the U.S. could see inflation bounce back up. And the second issue most folks aren't going to like. The Bank of Canada wants to see people get smaller raises. Wages have been going up 4 to 5% annually, and Macklem wants to see that go down, so workers have less money to spend on expensive goods. So for now, rates are staying at 5%, but there is some good news. Most economists are expecting cuts later this year, but the governor does have a warning about what those will look like.
I think it's very safe to say we're not going to be lowering rates at the pace we raised them.
So while rates took a rocket ship up to a 22-year high, it looks like it'll be baby steps on the way down, Donna, and the first chance for that to happen will come on April 10th.
Okay, Mac, let's switch topics completely and talk about the controversial ArriveCan app. A company hired to create it called GC Strategies got millions of dollars in federal government contracts. It's now had its security status suspended. What's behind that?
Well, we don't really know, Donna, because the government had previously said back in November that GC Strategies was suspended from doing any business with the procurement department, let alone government contracts requiring security clearances, and that is the most difficult business to get. Think deals involving military priming, programs related to Canadian financial records, the most sensitive of stuff. So we asked the department, PCSP, as to why they waited 4 months to suspend their security clearance, and we've yet to hear back. Now, the bad news, that's bad news for the two-man consulting firm at the heart of the ArriveCan debacle, a program the Auditor General had said was the worst financial record keeping she's ever seen. But at a House of Commons committee today, Donna, we heard that the owners should be financially okay after they won 118 contracts with over $100 million from the federal government since 2011.
Very rich contracts. Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thanks. Whether the federal government is going to resume funding the UN's aid agency in Gaza appears uncertain tonight. A news conference about it scheduled for this morning was abruptly cancelled after leaked reports said the humanitarian funding that was frozen in January is poised to begin again. There's no question food and medicine is desperately needed in Gaza, but Israel doesn't want the UN relief agency, which has operated there for years, involved. Abigail Beeman reports.
Another aid truck full of flour rushed by hundreds of hungry people in Gaza. This man separates flour from dirt. This is what we have, he says.
UNRWA has been the main contributor, the main entity to be able to reach all the communities that are most in need.
Canada is among nations facing pressure from some groups to reinstate funding to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. Funding was paused after allegations a dozen UNRWA staff members participated in Hamas's October 7th massacre of Israelis. A senior Canadian government source tells Global News no decision has been made, but it's likely funding will resume this week. A press conference with the relevant officials promising an update on Gaza aid was cancelled at the last minute Wednesday.
It's dangerous, and we need to find alternatives to UNRWA immediately so that the people in Gaza will get the aid they need in a proper manner.
Israel's ambassador to Canada wants funding to stay paused until independent UN investigations are done and says Israel is working to share intelligence to back up the claim Hamas has substantially infiltrated UNRWA.
We are trying to make sure that also the Canadian government will have the access to this kind of information as soon as possible.
Next week, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister visits Israel and the West Bank. Melanie Joly began her Middle East tour in Saudi Arabia Wednesday. The trip coincides with the start of the holy month of Ramadan. There's hope of a negotiated ceasefire and release of hostages by then, but the date is quickly approaching.
If it's not something that would be permanent, we will be seeing a much deeper catastrophe.
Now the ball is in Hamas's court to accept that deal.
Israel's ambassador says there is concern Hamas is trying to draw things out into Ramadan, worried about a possible incitement of new violence during a sensitive time. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
Israel intends to build more homes for settlers in the occupied West Bank. It has approved plans for more than 3,400 new homes. An Israeli minister says the construction is a response to a deadly Palestinian attack in the area 2 weeks ago. The U.S. says it's disappointed to hear about the housing proposal. The Palestinian Authority has condemned it. Most countries, including Canada and the U.S., consider the settlements on occupied land illegal under international law and an obstacle to a two-state solution. More than 18,500 of the homes have been approved in the West Bank since Benjamin Netanyahu took power. Explosions hit the Ukrainian city of Odessa today, close to where President Volodymyr Zelensky was meeting the Greek Prime Minister. The Ukrainian Navy says 5 people were killed. No one from either political delegation was injured. The leaders say they heard sirens and explosions and did not have time to get to a shelter. Greek media reported one missile landed just 150 meters away from them. The pair was visiting a home damaged in a Russian attack on Saturday that killed 12 people, including 5 children. A First Nation is suing the Alberta energy regulator. We'll tell you why coming up. Plus, renewed concern about the Pope. He was unable to climb the steps into the Pope-mobile today. King Charles spoke with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on a video call today. It's believed to be the first time they've talked since the King's cancer diagnosis. The King had largely stepped away from public duties. Trudeau says he let the monarch know Canadians are keeping him in their thoughts as he undergoes treatment. The King also met in person today with ambassadors from Algeria and Mauritania at Buckingham Palace after taking time off for treatment. Pope Francis held his weekly audience in St. Peter's Square today and was unable to climb the steps onto his Pope-mobile. Once again, he relied on an aide to read his catechism lesson to the crowd. Crystal Gamansing looks at how the 87-year-old Pope is doing.
Pope Francis arrived in his usual fashion for the first weekly audience he held outdoors this year. While he smiled and waved, his movements appeared stiff. Photographs from Wednesday showed the 87-year-old pontiff being supported to stand and sit. Pope Francis greeted the crowd and then said, "Today's catechesis will be read by one of my helpers because I still have a cold and cannot read well." His health is being watched by his more than 1 billion followers, although this theology professor isn't worried.
It's the health condition of an 87-year-old man who has had lung issues for his whole life.
The Vatican hasn't said much about his health, but some of his struggles are obvious. The Pope can resign and has stated he would think about it when he can no longer do the job. Experts suggest if he made such a move, it would be a surprise announcement so that no political maneuvering could take place. The Pope has been keeping up with key meetings, but it's his travel schedule abroad that Massimo Fagioli is watching.
One of the factors that had a huge influence in Pope Benedict's decision to resign is inability to take long trips abroad.
While nothing is on the Vatican calendar yet, a potential visit to 4 Asian nations in August has been widely talked about. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
Still ahead, an Alberta First Nation launches a lawsuit over toxic spills from tailings ponds. A Northern Alberta First Nation is suing Alberta's energy regulator over its handling of a series of leaks and spills from a tailings pond at an oil sands mine. Between 2021 and 2022, more than 5 million litres of contaminated water was released from the Curl mine site, operated by Imperial Oil. In a statement of claim, the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation says the Alberta energy regulator failed to regulate or monitor the facility in a manner that minimized the risk of tailings, seepages, or spills. Heather Urix West explains why the First Nation is seeking $500 million in damages.
If it was up to me, I'd shut down the oil sands rig today.
It was an emotional meeting in Fort Chippewa on Tuesday as community members met with Alberta's energy regulator. Last year, the Athabasca Chippewa First Nation learned contaminated water was seeping into their traditional lands from an oil sands mining site operated by Imperial Oil. The company had notified Alberta's energy regulator about the spill right away, but First Nation leadership weren't informed for another 9 months.
They've infringed on our treaty rights so bad that we're going to be taking the Alberta energy regulator to court.
The lawsuit is seeking financial compensation, claiming the regulator was negligent in its management of tailings. There is more than 1 trillion litres of the toxic byproduct of oil sands production currently sitting in a series of open ponds across the region.
Co-management or joint management with Indigenous communities and First Nations is something that Chief Alan Adam has been asking for a long time, demanding, really.
The Alberta Energy Regulator says it's seeking legal advice in response to the lawsuit. Last year, its CEO apologized before a federal committee for failing to inform the public about the spill. A third-party review later found the regulator followed all existing policies and procedures.
It definitely sends a clear message both to the regulator and to the provincial government that there's a dissatisfaction within at least the First Nation community of how the regulators doing their job.
Mark Taylor worked with the Alberta Energy Regulator until 2019. He believes the AER needs to change how they operate in order to maintain public trust.
I would suggest they need to put more focus on how they communicate their decisions, or even before they've reached a decision, communicating what they are doing.
Chief Alan Adams says the incident has left lasting scars that won't be able to heal until the regulator makes significant change. Heather Urix-West, Global News, Calgary.
Deep sea disaster next. The documentary asking what lessons have been learned from the Titan submersible tragedy. For 5 days last June, the world watched as Canadian authorities led the search for the Titan submersible off the coast of Newfoundland. There was hope the 5 people on board were still alive until evidence was found the vessel had imploded as it descended to the wreck of the Titanic. Tonight, a new documentary airs on British television, and our Heidi Petrachuk spoke with the filmmakers about what they uncovered and why the Titan's tale endures.
When the Titan submersible went missing off the coast of Newfoundland last June, the world was gripped by the dramatic story, and still is.
It's almost a year on, but it still managed to capture people's imaginations.
Jeremy Daldry heads up a 2-part TV series airing in the UK, seeking to uncover just what happened when the Ocean Gate vessel reached a depth of 3,500 meters below sea level, 5 people on board, in a final, fateful expedition to the wreck of the Titanic. The documentary features something never heard before, the mysterious knocking recorded by sonar buoys during the search after the Titan lost communication. At the time, those sounds spurred hope there were survivors. The recording provided to British producers by the Canadian Air Force.
Some very intelligent, very experienced people, both in the Royal Canadian Air Force and in the American Coast Guard, felt it was worth exploring, and it became the absolute epicenter of the search.
We actually flew for about 11 hours on our sortie.
In the end, officials determined the submersible had imploded before the search had even begun, killing everyone inside instantly.
First of all, it's a mystery. Nobody knows exactly what happened.
For David Pogue of CBS, who was aboard the Titan on an earlier, much shorter expedition, that's part of the story's lasting intrigue.
And there's a schadenfreude element. You know, these were millionaires. And a lot of people feel like they got what they had coming to them.
Deep sea exploration is valid and it's important and it has a place, but it needs to be managed.
A lesson Daldry hopes viewers take with them, even as questions remain for others to explore. Heidi Petrachuk, Global News, Halifax.
That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Here Canada is Kakabeka Falls Provincial Park, just west of Thunder Bay, Ontario. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.